I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than. I'm an autism awareness angel. It's good, cause I'm cool with the unique behavior. I'm an autism awareness angel. Will you accept me? Cause I accept you. I'm an autism awareness angel, cause the view from the spectrum is a better point of view. The question at hand, are you...
Hi, I'm Tally, and welcome back to Autism 30. In today's podcast, we have once again Tina and Kathy in our studio, and of course that means it's a Parent Talk podcast, which I know is popular with our listeners. So I want to welcome you both back into our studio, talking about wonderful things about our community.
Great.
Good
Happy to be here.
Yeah. Good to see you guys
Now,
again.
once again, we answer questions that are sent in, and one of the questions that we had is... February was Inclusive Education Month here in British Columbia. How do you feel inclusive education is working in BC, and what improvements would you like to see? Now, why don't we start with Tina?
Oh, yeah, thanks. I feel like for me personally, inclusive education is working really well, but I feel like there is a huge spectrum, if you will, of people's experiences in BC. And so, I feel like I need to speak to that a little bit. I do have some connections through Facebook and through friends of people who are really kind of struggling. And so I think part of the challenge is that it's kind of a policy across the board. And I guess I don't know if I really like that it's not individualized. So, from the beginning, parents are really, for the most part, and I know Kathy will speak to her experiences being a little bit different, but across the province in general, it's inclusion at all costs. And so maybe inclusion isn't the best for kids. And so philosophically, I feel like it should be more individualized than that, and there should be more options. I know that there's a book that I found early on in my journey. It's a funny book called Shut Up About Your Perfect Kid. And
Yes.
Anyway, the reason I bring up that book is because at the end, the daughter with high-functioning Asperger's ends up at a really interesting school where it's kind of for sort of quirky kids with disabilities and Asperger's, and it's just sort of a mainstream publicly funded school, but it's not maybe inclusive in a regular school. And I just don't feel like we have a lot of options like that. Like I feel like when my daughter gets to high school, it'll just be one of the classic high schools, and there's no sort of way for her to, I'm worried about when she gets older, if she can't quite do the mainstreaming, is she going to just be in a life skills class, right?
Yes.
And so, maybe it works for the younger kids, but maybe it's not as well thought out for the older kids, and maybe there should be something kind of in the middle, or I don't know. I just feel like it needs to be a little bit more individualized. And then I guess the other challenge is, of course, it's inclusion is the right and the main goal for all kids, but I don't know if the BC government is really funding special education to the level that can actually be successfully realized. And so some students I know are being asked to only come half days, or for their EAs to come, parents to come pick them up, or
And I think that's something typical parents don't even think about.
No. You send your child to school and pick them up at the end of the day,
But the typical parent absolutely would. But Tina, what you're mentioning, I've heard that repeatedly, where parents are asked to either keep their children home because the EAs are absent, or students are going only a half a day. And that isn't an uncommon story, even though legally here in the province of British Columbia, children who are deemed special needs do have the right to be at school as a typical child would, from whenever they start to whenever they finish. But what you're mentioning is that's not necessarily happening on all fronts.
It's definitely not happening. I've heard a lot of people recently too saying that they've been asked to keep their child home, and it's not maybe that their child's EA is sick, but it's somebody else's child's EA is sick, and so they have to share. They have to take turns keeping their children home. And for some of us, that means not going to work and not getting paid.
Yes.
So yeah, certainly a problem there. Our situation was a little different. I was really happy when my son was starting school that he was able to just go to our neighborhood school, just, walk down the street and go to the same school that his typical older sibling went to. And I found while we were there, he had fantastic support. We were definitely some of those statistics that were asked to keep your child home, the EA is sick. That was difficult. Keep your child home or have him come in short days because he was having a rough time. Well, I remember saying, does he have a rough time? Maybe pick him up at noon. I said, does he usually have a rough time afternoon? No, it's in the morning. Well,
Yes.
then.
Plus, I think sometimes it creates a precedent. Like my school was very good because they said, we don't want a pattern where she knows if she has bad behavior, she gets to go home.
Yes.
So luckily my school was
that's a good
good and
point.
recognized
Yeah.
that. But some schools, I think, aren't recognizing that. And you're doing the thing we talked about in a, feeding the beast, you're
Yes.
reinforcing the wrong behavior because maybe the child finds home a more calming environment. And
Yes.
so they
To
know
go.
what to do.
That's-
Anyway, I
that's a
interrupted you.
good
Keep
point.
going. Yeah.
That's a good point. No, I think that's all I was going to say was that it was, I was so happy that I could just go to the local school that all the other neighborhood kids were going to, and that we were given a lot of great supports. But for my son, it didn't matter. It was still too overwhelming. It was a very overwhelming environment.
Yes.
You walk down any elementary school when school's out or recess is about to start, and there's just a mob of screaming kids running down the hallways, excited, and it's for anyone coming in the opposite direction, it can be a little overwhelming. But for kids with on the spectrum with
Sensory challenges.
with the sensory challenges, there you go. It was too much for my son. Inclusive education didn't work.
So what you're talking about is you chose a more individualized program for him.
Actually, no. I have an interesting story, and shall I just continue on?
Absolutely.
I didn't choose a more individualized program. The school district chose us for,
Wow, which is lovely.
Yeah, they supplied a lot of reports. They spent a lot of energy and resources on trying to make it work in a regular inclusive school environment. And we had wonderful people. There was some excellent people there, great strategies, but it was just still too overwhelming for him. So in our school district, they actually realized there was a need for kids to have an option. And so my son's in a non-inclusive environment. He's in a school with, it's a very small classroom of children with autism and, a lot of sensory
Needs.
Thank you. A lot of sensory needs. And it was like night and day. It was a different child as soon as we took him out. Didn't matter what support we had, didn't matter how wonderful they were. It was the wrong environment for my child. And so now he's in this lovely, quiet classroom with no overhead fluorescent lighting, no speakers that go off, no bells. Those school bells are ridiculous, aren't
Yes, absolutely.
they? Nothing like that. No intercoms coming, crackling in and interrupting. It's just very calm. And at the end of the day, when I go to pick him up, I'd often find him sitting with the lights dimmed in a beanbag chair waiting for me to get him.
Which is lovely.
Happy, calm, happy. So, I think that the inclusive environment is wonderful that we have it, and it's a wonderful option. But I think for some of us, there has to be another choice.
Absolutely, and I absolutely agree. I know our family, we're really fortunate. We lucked in on an absolutely fabulous school for our son where the teachers and the headmaster get it. What I call get it is they actually understand autism very, very well, and they accommodate it throughout the school. But it's not necessarily it's a public school, but it's not the mainstream public school. So but we had the option of that for our
Right.
child, where it's not necessarily available to everybody. But one of the reasons why I love inclusive education is I see kids in this generation growing up, learning about kids with special needs or different learning styles and
Yes.
whatnot, and they believe and truly value everyone in the society. Where I know when I was a child,
Oh my gosh.
I mean, there
But I
were
think it depends on the quality of the demystification in the school, right?
and that's what I was going to get to, and I agree 100% in the sense that I know when my child went to school in kindergarten. I mean, I will talk about them more, which is Friend to Friends. We brought Friend to Friends, and which is a wonderful demystification company here in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia, and they came into the school where kids at their level were taught about what autism is and learned all about it, so that they weren't questioning anything. So when my child walked in, they kind of got him too, without outing him.
They don't out the child, which is very important. And I know there's another, I guess you can also get CAN in the Lower Mainland of BC. We'll do a
Yes.
demystification, but I
And
think
CAN is Canucks Autism Network.
yeah, but I think they do maybe identify the child. I don't know for sure. I have heard that. So, but I mean, people have different choices that they want to make and demystifications that they want to do. But I think you're right. And continue your point. I'm sorry I interrupted, but I think you're right. The kids are growing up now. I've seen my husband. Related the story to me of a child on the playground demystifying her grandma, who was sort of questioning what my daughter was doing, and the girl said to her grandma, "Oh, don't you know life is really hard for her? It's like there's like school bells and loud noises and stuff going on constantly in her head, and that's what she has to deal with. So that's why she's acting that way, but it's okay." Or I can't remember the exact wording, so I'm not doing it justice, but it was just a very touching
That's a
moment
nice story,
that
yeah.
she remembered the demystification and was applying it forward. So
And I think that education in itself, I mean, when they talk about inclusive education, I know many people of, let's say, my generation would think, oh, it's all about catering to the special needs child and whatnot. But I don't think what's spoken enough about is what you mentioned, Tina, is the education the typical children get in that school, and the level of knowledge and awareness that they have of different people
And acceptance.
and acceptance.
So I have a question for you guys. I've heard on the media reports about people saying things about inclusion. I know there's been reports of people saying things like it isn't, maybe it's harmful to the typical kids, or taking resources away, or holding typical children back, or costing the system too much money. I feel like there's a lot of complaints out there. I personally haven't had anyone say it to me myself, although I have read it and been alarmed at the thoughts, and I've seen on social media some very ignorant thoughts. But just wondering if you guys have any experience with people kind of saying those things, or what you've said to them.
Oh,
or...
I certainly do. I remember clearly last year or 2 years ago, I was at a party. We were all with my son's school friends, and all the kids were off playing, including my son, and all the parents were sitting around in a circle, all talking as you do when you go to birthday parties with people. And I remember clearly this one parent was talking to me, and what amazed me is she knew about my son, and she did this in front of everybody else in the group as well. And she was going on about how her niece was special needs, and how she found it a travesty because of the fact that she was taking up resources from the other kids in the class, and it took her twice as long to get things done. And it really wasn't fair to all the other kids who had to wait for her in the group. And don't you think that it's a high time that the parents of this child accepted their diagnosis and accepted the fact that this child would only have a menial job anyhow, and was looking at me directly. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm a very diplomatic person, and I wouldn't have caused a scene because it wasn't her party, it wasn't my friend's party. And I remember some of the parents that were sitting there, they said absolutely nothing. And I thought, this isn't the time or the place. And I understand that this person also is of my generation, in the sense that who obviously didn't have inclusive education. And I sat there listening to her thinking, I can't debate with this person. This isn't the right time and place, but she's spewing out all this ignorance. And I remember clearly thinking in the back of my head, thinking, you're directing this to me because my child is in your son's class, and you're talking to me because you obviously feel that my child, it's not fair. Oh, and it was clearly stated that, you know what, people who have dyslexia, people that have all these other things don't get a special one-on-one EA. And my child has had a one-on-one EA since he's in kindergarten. And I was thinking to myself, going in my head to this woman, thinking, lady, you don't even know. My child, your child might have to wait for my child, but my child is gifted in mathematics. At his age, he's doing algebra and every other thing. And my child has to sit through a boring math class to accommodate your child. And I didn't say that out loud, but this is what was going on in my head. And I think there's an amazing amount of ignorance to typical parents out there who feel that special needs children are holding them back, because it's clearly not that way. I think, Tina, you brought a brilliant thing saying that about that grandparent. I think that our generation, there's a real ignorance and lack of knowledge about special needs in general. And there's a real misnomer that our children's needs are also not necessarily always met because of the typical child. So that even though our students are in an inclusive education, that to get a perfect educational system out there is quite difficult. But I think an inclusive education, and the education that this woman is clearly lacking, will go a long way within the future generations that have absolutely had the benefit of being in an inclusive environment.
I feel for you. I just can't even imagine being in that kind of a situation. I thought you were going to tell me that you punched her.
No, but I
In the face.
but I can tell you it was absolutely lovely. I know the next, on the Monday when I did go back to school, some of the parents who sat very quietly around that
came to
circle,
you and-
I know one of them said, I have to give you a hug. What you experienced at that party, nobody should have to go. So there are educated people out there. Not everybody in our generation believes that. It's just that it amazes me how people can be blatantly ignorant and making statements. She obviously thought that that was an okay thing to say with the demeanor in which she said it. I really don't think she was trying to be insulting. She was just clearly stating how she
she's
felt.
getting stuff off her chest, and the issue was her, not you, right?
Absolutely.
But I think it's hard because it's always, as a special needs parent, you're trying to decide, like, should you take on that role of educating this person? And I think if she hadn't been so aggressive, you could have had a back and forth. But sometimes people have such strongly held beliefs that it's practically a religion, and in that case, you're not going to win. And I think you picked your battles, and I'm just surprised you sat there and listened to it. I would have just walked away. Like, it might, I might, there is a tip that I learned about, kind of think about the different kinds of people in your life, acquaintances, family, friends, strangers, and when they say these ignorant things, kind of have a pre-canned comment that
That's
you want
a
to
really
do.
good idea.
So
I
you
should
can
have.
have, because you're always like in the shower later. Oh, I should have said this,
know.
right? So
Shoulda, coulda,
you know,
woulda.
so you just
Yeah.
find like what kind of person you are. Are you someone who likes to use humor? Do you feel really strong about advocacy and education? Do you want to educate people? Do you want to just get on with your day and not have to deal with it, and you don't feel like even giving them 2 seconds? And that answer might be different for strangers versus acquaintances versus family versus friends. But for each of those 4 groups, just have what you wanted to do and what you want to say, and then you don't, in the moment, if you're flustered or frustrated or upset, you just go to your go-to line and then you just walk away. So
I wish I had that
sometimes
piece of knowledge back.
yeah,
because
so just think about that, so the one I've got is the one I've got canned and ready to go. I'm just waiting for someone to just say something, is more for like someone who says something ignorant. And I know lots of parents experience this. We've been pretty lucky. We haven't had much of it, despite having a daughter who's like quite clearly autistic. So it's not like she goes under anyone's radar. But anyway, my thing is to say, does it make you feel good to bully special needs children, or to bully the parents of special needs children? Because I think it calls out the adult as a bully, and bullies are taboo right now,
Yes,
right?
very true.
And and I think that just kind of shuts it down, and it's a bit of a humory thing too. Like, does it make you feel good to bully the parents of special needs children? And just walk away. I'm waiting to use that, but
I hope you don't have to.
I hope
Yes, I
that's
hope you
nice.
don't
That's
have
perfect.
to.
Yeah. One thing that came to mind just quickly is, we were just speaking before about what you think about it, inclusive education in BC.
Yes.
And what we were just speaking about is, for that person that was all upset, she was not recognizing the benefits that that typical children are getting from having the inclusive. So it all kind of circles back. And
Yes.
that just made me realize that, when we were talking about inclusion a moment ago, I didn't say some of the great successes that I've had out of inclusion. And I just want to make sure that, if there's any educators in BC that are listening to this, that, our EAs have done a great job. And, some EAs have better strengths than others, or better paired to my daughter, and are better able to have inclusion. And so, I think that is a struggle, maybe the education of EAs. They don't have to all be trained in autism. So maybe that's something that could be improved. But for the ones, when you get that perfect EA, she's made such gains. And she really fought to get us like an Instagram account so she can share pictures with us. And so I have pictures of like kids all like fighting and clamoring to sit with my daughter, or to hug my daughter, or to push her on the swing, or my daughter pushes them on the swing,
That
or
is so nice,
hugging,
because your
or-
daughter can't come home and tell you about
Exactly.
her day. That is so
I guess,
nice.
communication is key, right? And
Yeah.
advocating for good communication. But
Absolutely.
a picture is worth 1,000 words.
It
And when you
is,
see,
yeah.
like, they had someone in from the like lacrosse association teaching them how to play lacrosse or something. I don't know. But, it was kind of one of those games in gym where each person has to wait for the next person.
Yes.
And this stranger was just helping coach her through, and all her classmates were clapping her on, and she's able to follow the direction. And all of those things are huge successes for us. But just in the last year especially, she started to really make social connections, and that's really helped the kids socially connect to her. And
Yes.
so
Nice.
this growth and this connectivity and sharing and socialization is just such a high for us, such a big leap. And I think sometimes some parents maybe would feel like, oh, my child wouldn't do well in an inclusive education, but or they, we plowed ahead, put her in kindergarten on time. We had some struggles, but in the end, it's really paid off. And I know, I know someone who homeschooled, but who tried to do public education first. And what they said is, you've got the kids. Like, that's
Yes.
what I don't have. I can teach math, I can teach reading, but I don't have these kids. That's what you've got. So you've got to make the most of it, right? And that was in a
Absolutely.
previous time where maybe inclusion wasn't as strong of a thing. But yeah.
And I just want to reiterate, I know if my child's EA and teachers are out there listening, I concur, and I absolutely agree. We have been so fortunate to have a fabulous EA who's been working with our child since kindergarten, and his other EA who's
Wow,
worked
the same one, right
the
through?
exact
Wow.
same one, and she's absolutely fabulous. And I know that his kindergarten teacher was absolutely brilliant too. He's had really good teachers at the school, and I'm a teacher myself, and it's so great when as you said, have a really wonderful staff and supporting environment for our kids. And I agree, more education needs to be done in the way of autism for teachers and for EAs and whatnot. But if you land on the right one, miracles really can happen. And I know my son is a benefit to the wonderful EAs and teachers that he's had.
I have to say the same thing, that right through the get-go, we've had really good support. EAs and people that are brought in from the district to help with, special behaviors or whatever, and resource teachers, and we've had really good support.
My heart just goes out because I know there's a lot of families in BC who are having so many challenges. And so, 3 of us sitting here having good experiences, I don't know if that's completely representative, and my heart breaks for everyone. And so, I guess just if you're one of the families that's not maybe having the most success, just try to reach out for advocacy resources and see who you can connect with, and bring it up to the district level, and if you need to, and really, I've had one consultant tell me, you get more flies with honey kind of thing, right? So you always kind of start off, positive, but I think sometimes you do have to push back a little bit, right? And
Absolutely.
I don't know. My heart breaks for families that are really struggling.
And I agree. Now, I don't know how any of you chose the school for your child to go to, but I know when I was looking for schools for my son to go to, and I know some parents don't even know this is an option, is that I went and interviewed not only one school, but I think I interviewed almost every single school in my local area, in my city area.
You really did the research.
Yes, I did. And I went with a criteria list, and I interviewed the principal, the vice principal, and I looked at the teachers. I interviewed the EAs of all the schools, and I made appointments with them. And I was very kind and mindful of their time, but I really wanted to go in and see the environment and the people who my son would possibly be working with. And I know in doing that process, it really led me to a very clear decision as to where I would send my child. So if any of you are out there thinking, I have the local feeder school, this is the school that my child needs to go to, and don't bother checking out your other schools and what is really available to you, then you're pretty much stuck with what you have, meaning that it's really difficult to advocate if you're in a stuck situation. It's better to pre-plan and go forward than to get into a stuck situation and try to work that as best as you can, which if that's what you have to do, by all means advocate. And I think, Tina, you mentioned a good thing is to learn about the resources out there for you to be able to do that. But I strongly suggest that before you send your child to school, really do your homework and go to the locations and interview the people who will be directly working with your child.
Right. And I know that advice that was given to me is don't choose a school because you like the principal.
Yes.
Because they change quite frequently.
Yes, they do.
And I think more so these days than they used to.
Yeah, and I mean, that can be challenging. I think one thing that I made sure to do is to talk to other parents of, like, it can be hard if you don't have a lot of, parent friends in the local area.
Yes.
So just putting your feelers out there and finding out, like, if there's any at the playground, if you see anyone with this that might have special needs approaching the parent, do you go to this school? How do you find it? What do you think?
Yes.
And kind of getting a heads up that way. And,
well, I know one of the questions that I had, which was on my list, is can you guarantee me that my child will have his own EA and not shared with a whole bunch of people? And a bunch of schools that I went to said, no, I can't guarantee that for your child. And in my head, that pretty much crossed off all those schools. And I interviewed until I could get. Now, I know that's not necessarily possible throughout the whole of British Columbia, but depending on what your particular needs are, or as parents, what is important to you, which I think you need to discuss as a family, so that when you go and interview the schools, or when you go and look at prospective educational establishments for your child, that you really go in clearly looking for what you want in a school.
Yeah, and something that I guess I was going to say, I was just having trouble thinking of the words, is something to consider is how crowded the school is. So
Very true.
We were really lucky in that our school is underpopulated, so there's lots of extra rooms. So there's both a resource room that my daughter can go to for extra, like kind of work on what she needs, both academically or socially.
And a quieter
And
environment.
then a quiet room.
Yeah.
And so the quiet room has nothing fun in it. So like when she was younger, if she needed a place to go and calm down, she could go there. But it wasn't a place where there was fun, happy toys, because otherwise she would melt down deliberately to get there, which,
Yes.
was like a social manipulation, which was good developmentally, but maybe not, for school. So, so I know there is some school districts I've heard of where parents are saying that the school is overpopulated. There's no spare rooms. There's no place to go for a quiet time. So kids are just kind of stuck in the hall, which the hall is often used as a place of punishment. Go to the hall.
Yes.
And it's also not as quiet as you would think. And so it's just really not optimal. And so I think that, you don't always get to choose these things, right? You're working parents and you have to go to a local school because it's close and you can do drop-offs and stuff. So I know you're saying like it's better to shop around and not get stuck in a situation. I mean, every situation is workable.
Absolutely.
So, don't feel like, that if you can't, like we just felt like we couldn't. We had a nanny. We had to have a nanny because my daughter's needs were so high. She couldn't be in a typical daycare. And so there's just no way we're going to have this nanny driving to some other school. So we really felt we needed to try our local school first.
Right.
But I did, put my feelers out there. It did have extra space. It did seem like she was going to get an EA. I had a good feel for the principal. I had met the teachers, and other parents are saying that my school was very good for special needs. Like it was very highly rated by other parents. So I mean, I had a good feeling going in. But I guess there's just so many factors. It's such a big decision, and I think
It
it's
really
just so
is
hard. Yeah.
And the school of where your child goes to, whether it's homeschooling, a special school, or an educational establishment that's a school itself, that'll have a major impact on the development of your child. So the only suggestion I can issue out there is whatever decision you make it with a lot of thought about what's important to your family, and take all these factors into consideration.
Plus private school. Some people go the private school route
Right.
or the
Absolutely.
homeschool route. There's lots of, and even within homeschooling, there's distributive learning options where you can get the
Absolutely.
special needs funding and you have access to that to do your own thing. So it's not, just cookie cutter public school.
Right.
Although,
No.
I mean, in a perfect world, we'd all be able to go to free public school and have all our needs met.
Absolutely, really true. So if some of you are out there who feel that the educational establishment, be it that all the various types of schools that we've mentioned, if you feel as parents that they don't really seem to meet your needs, or what I strongly suggest you do is advocate for your child, absolutely, but try to motivate your local counselor or your MLA to look at what should be available for our children out there in your local area, because we need more voices out there advocating as a whole group for our children at the local level and at the provincial level, so that all of our children, regardless as to where you are in British Columbia and what school is available at your local area, to better fund and better equip your school or what you choose to how to educate your child, so that those services can be better for your child and others. I know one of the things before sending my child to school that really concerned me, but what were some of your biggest concerns of sending your children to school?
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
I think for a lot of people, it might be, I want my child to make friends. I want them to have that social piece. I don't want them to be bullied. Well, that's all true for me too, but I think my major concerns were, is he going to receive the best support? Is he going to get good support? Does it meet his needs? Will he be happy there?
And those are all valid concerns. Tina, what about you?
Same things, absolutely, for sure. I guess I was also just worried about communication because my child cannot tell me what happened at school. And at first,
True.
At first, it was hard, I guess, to get a communication book going. There was a lot of pushback about how much time the EAs had to be documenting, I guess because she was so high needs. But then eventually we've got a good communication book going. I actually modeled it off nursing. So nurses don't have a lot of time to document, so they have a lot of checklists. So I had for the morning and the afternoon, the 5 things I cared about: social, language, participation in the classroom, meltdowns, whatever, and just put a 1 to 5. So even if they had no time, they could tick off where she was 1 to 5. And I could see if it was all 1s or all 5s, what kind of day she had.
That's a great idea.
Yeah,
That is a great idea.
and then over time, then they would document. I'd ask them to tell me one thing she did in the morning and one thing she did in the afternoon, so I could try to talk to her about her day as a way. And then at one point we started sending an iPod so she could they could take pictures, and we could use that to talk about her day. And then now that evolved into an Instagram account, so that's nice. We can show her pictures and she can talk about her day. But communication is definitely a challenge, and I've heard horror stories off the internet and stuff, right? And I feel pretty confident none of that could happen at my school, just because there's so many people around and because of inclusion that I think someone would see something, say something, if you will. But so communication, and then I know some people too are always worried about kindergarten readiness. That's a whole nother topic, I guess, right? But my daughter's a January baby, and we just felt like we were going to go and make and do our best. And I'm glad we didn't hold her back. It gives us another year at the end.
Which I think is completely valid. I know one of the things that you just mentioned, which was definitely my concern. I know I'm bringing my past baggage with me because of the fact that that's all you really have to go on. And I know one of the reasons why I became a teacher is because I didn't really have, I had some great teachers, but I remember in my elementary school, I had a teacher that was ruthless with me and bullied me, unbelievably. And I remember sitting there as a child thinking, I'm never going to be like this person. And I remember when I decided to go into education, I told myself, I'm not going to be like that person, and I'm going to make the system better. However, when you have a special needs child that can't communicate with you, that can't talk, and you're going to blindly send them off to an educational establishment, thinking at the end of the day, when I asked my child, how did your day go? At least I was able to tell my parents, well, this teacher hit me, this teacher did X, Y, and Z to me. But my child didn't have the ability to do that. I know myself, before sending my child to school, I was getting panic attacks because I just thought, how can I do this? How can I possibly send him off? And that's why that I feel so fortunate and grateful to have ended up in the situation that I'm in now. But sending my child to school, I think, honestly, was one of the most difficult things that I've had to do in my adult life.
I
without
think we
question.
can probably all say the same thing, right?
You know,
You give up
It was
power.
hard.
yes, and that's it. Giving up power. It's trusting.
The trust, you have to have trust. That's it.
Yes, and I don't think typical parents actually get that when they send their children off to school. When they come back, round dinner table, at the dinner table talk, I know many people go, oh, my child, when I ask them what's happening at school, the typical answer is, well, nothing, and nothing happened and whatnot. But the reality of it is, if they really wanted to pry into, they would actually have the ability to open up and get to the
Right.
crux, where our situation is
It's
really
different.
different. It's different. So I completely concur with what you're saying. Communication really is a huge factor. Now, and once again, believe it or not, we've run out of time. And this pretty much concludes our Parent Talk podcast about inclusive education in BC. And I really want to thank you, Kathy and Tina, for once again joining us in studio.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for having us.
And I want to thank you, our Autism 30 audience, for joining us once again for this wonderful Parent Talk podcast. And we've hoped you found some of the discussion educational, and I hope you can pass on the word to others who need it. And if you have a question for our Parent Talk podcast, please don't forget to send them in by going to our autism30.com webpage and clicking the word contact, scrolling down and filling out all of your contact details and your wonderful questions for us to answer on our next podcast. So once again, this is Tally telling you to live in love.
Hey yo, I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than. I'm an autism awareness angel. It's good, cause I'm cool with the unique behavior. I'm an autism awareness angel. Will you accept me? Cause I accept you. I'm an autism awareness angel, cause a view from the spectrum is a better place.